Our non-biblical reading for this morning comes from the book of Lessons by Jan Richardson called Circle of Grace. This one is called Dazzling. Believe me, I know how tempting it is to remain inside this blessing, to linger where everything is dazzling and clear. We could build walls around this blessing, put a roof over it. We could bring in a table, chairs, have the most amazing meals. We could make a home. We could stay. But this blessing is built for leaving. This blessing is made for coming down the mountain. This blessing wants to be in motion. To travel with you as you return to level ground.
Scriptural readings, Matthew 17, verses 1 to 13. 6 days later, Jesus took Peter, James, and John up on a mountain to be alone. And before their eyes, Jesus was transfigured, his face becoming as dazzling as the sun, and his clothes as radiant as light. Suddenly, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, conversing with Jesus. Then Peter said, "Rabbi, how good that we are here. With your permission, I will erect those shelters here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Peter was still speaking when suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed him. Out of the cloud came a voice which said, "This is my own, my beloved, on whom my favor rests. Listen to him." When they heard this, the disciples fell forward on the ground, overcome with fear. Jesus came toward them and touched them, saying, "Get up, don't be afraid." When they looked up, they did not see anyone but Jesus. As they were coming down the mountainside, Jesus commanded them, "Don't tell anyone about this until the chosen one has risen from the dead." The disciples asked, "Why do the religious scholars claim that Elijah must come first?" Jesus replied, "Elijah is indeed coming and will restore all things. But the truth is, Elijah has already come. They didn't recognize him, but treated him as they pleased. The chosen one will suffer at the hands in the same way." Then the disciples realized that Jesus had been speaking to them about John the Baptizer.
Would you pray with me? Divine Spirit, as we hear these ancient stories, move in us that we might find new meaning, make them relevant for us and for today. Bless you. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts might be filled with your insight and your wisdom. Amen. So the story of the Transfiguration, as it's called, the story of Jesus going up the mountainside and turning this blazing white is an old story, a familiar story. It's also a very symbolic and metaphorical story. And we know this at the beginning because the first thing that we have is a mountain. A mountain was a huge symbol in ancient times. Remember the Greeks and the Romans, where did the gods and goddesses live? Olympus, up on the mountain. You know, that's where God lived, was up high somewhere, watching over everything, whether it was in the clouds or it was on top of the mountain. And so here again, we have a mountain involved, and Jesus has 3 of his disciples. I don't know why the rest didn't get to go. But he's got Peter, James, and John, and they're going up the mountain. And suddenly, Jesus changes a bit. His clothes start to shine, and his face starts to shine. And if you were a first century Jew, or if you were a Jew in just about any time, this was a clue, because who did this remind you of? Moses. Remember, Moses went up the mountain to get the Ten Commandments and his face started to shine. So, wow, Jesus is just like Moses. That was a really interesting clue in this story. And so he goes up the mountain, and he's got these three guys with him, and his clothes are shining, and they're starting to think, hey, this is kind of Moses-like, and then suddenly the illusion isn't just an illusion to Moses. We've got Moses and Elijah right there. Like the two original mountain men, if you will. Moses goes up to the mountains for the Ten Commandments, and Elijah, when his sort of life is in danger, runs to Mount Sinai, hides in a cave, and waits for God to speak to him and give him direction. These two are also, the great prophets of Israel, the great Hebrew prophets. And so having the two of them present in this story is significant because it provides support and continuity for who Jesus is to people. It says, hey, he's part of the Jewish story. This isn't anything different. This is just another step in the evolution of where God is taking us. So, Peter's all kind of like, wow, this is really cool, right? If you're Peter, first you're a little taken aback. But then you're like, well, we need to do something for these greats, the greats of the great. Peter says, hey, we'll build a tent. We'll make it comfy. But we find out really quickly that it wasn't about tent building. Because the next thing that happens is also very symbolic. A cloud overshadows them, descends upon them. And maybe you remember the Israelites going through the desert for 40 days, and they were led by a cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night. So that cloud, again, it's the symbol of God coming down from above to be with them. And there's this voice out of the cloud that sets the disciples straight. Pretty much says, do not build a tent. That is not what I was trying to say here. It says, what you're supposed to do is listen to this guy. Because he's pretty smart and he's got it all together. Alright, so things have sort of been cleared up. The problem is that Jesus is not an easy one to listen to right about now. In fact, in the section right before this, the disciples so didn't want to listen to what Jesus had to say. We're pretty far along in his ministry at this point, and he's really angered quite a few people. He's been pushing a lot of buttons, and things are getting kind of tense and kind of angry, and he's been warned not to go into Jerusalem because the authorities are waiting for him, and the higher-ups in the Jewish synagogue, temple are waiting for him, and it's not safe. The story right before this talks about him having to go to Jerusalem, and it's probably not going to be good, and Peter argues with him. This is the whole scene where Jesus says, get behind me, Satan! Which again is just a way of saying, you're not on the same page with me. We don't get to stop this journey we have to go through, no matter how hard it is. No matter what risk we have to take, it means going forward to fulfill this mission. This is a big moment for these three disciples, and a big moment for Jesus. It's a sliding door moment. How many of you seen the movie The Sliding Door? Oh gosh, are we the only ones? Jenny's seen it. Thank you, Jenny. So, The Sliding Door is a story about probably a 20-something woman, and she's running to catch a subway train. And she gets to the door of the train, and suddenly the movie takes two different directions. Follows one path, of what happens if she makes the train. And then it follows the path of what happens if that door closes right in front of her face and she just misses it. And what happens if her life goes the other direction from that moment. It's a seemingly innocuous moment. You make a train or you miss a train. But her life diverges in completely different ways. Dramatic ways. Because of that moment. It's a sliding door moment. Have you ever had those sliding door moments? Where something innocuous happens and you look back later and you go, wow. That one moment, and everything changed. For the good, for the not so good, sometimes not good or bad, just dramatically different because of that one moment. That sliding door moment. That's the moment the disciples are faced with. It's a threshold, to use another word. A threshold of, are we going to cross this through this doorway and head to Jerusalem, or are we going to set up a tent and just stay here where it feels really good and comfortable and safe? What are we going to do? I've been thinking a lot about thresholds and the symbolism in them and the thresholds that we cross in our lives. Can you think of life-changing moments that are thresholds that take us from, one place into a completely different place, universe, feeling, situation? What's a threshold? A life-changing threshold? A wedding.
Having a child.
Having a child.
Deciding to move.
Deciding to move. What
Losing
else?
a job.
Losing a job. Or getting a new job. A change of job.
Joining a church.
Joining a church. Leaving a church. What else?
Going to college.
Going to college.
Getting a serious illness.
Getting a serious illness. Charlie?
Going to school.
Going to school. And as you get older, choosing a college. Or not choosing a college. What else?
Getting married.
Getting married.
Job.
Job. What about smaller things? Have you ever wished you'd gone left instead of right? Have you ever wished that you had not stuck your foot in your mouth and said something? Or done something? And whatever those consequences were that happened after, oh, if I just wouldn't have said that, how my life would be different. Smaller sliding door moments, smaller thresholds that we cross over. And I want to explore the thresholds as we take this journey of Lent for the next 6-7 weeks after today. And the different thresholds that some of the Bible characters have crossed, or thresholds that we're encouraged to cross or to at least examine. And they're not always physical thresholds and concrete, something happened thresholds. There are also spiritual thresholds that we come up to where, a threshold is the person you are before you cross it and the person you're going to become. And a spiritual threshold is sort of the relationship you have with God in the present and the relationship that develops once you've crossed that spiritual threshold and maybe tried a new church, or maybe read a book, or maybe explored a retreat, or a different spiritual practice, or you just took a walk by the lake and you had an epiphany. But thresholds, none the least. So, in India, the temples in India, if you're going to go through the doorway to the temple, most of the time there's a really big step before the threshold, like 2 feet tall, so that you have to climb into the temple. And once you get over the threshold, there's very often a statue of a snake on one side and a statue of a dragon on the other side. Symbolically standing for the aversions and the attachments that we have to let go of to cross over into the spiritual, sacred space and realm. The things that we're afraid of and the things that we cling to that are obstacles in our life. We all have those. The thresholds that we come up against often have, in those sliding door moments, there are things that keep us from going across. Things that keep us wanting to stay where we are. Just like the disciples. Oh, we'll just build a tent. If you were those disciples, what would be your aversions and your attachments to wanting to go to Jerusalem? Put yourself in their spot for a minute. What holds you back from listening? Fear of what?
Change.
Fear of change?
Unknown.
What was that?
Unknown.
The unknown.
Routine.
You don't want to break so you're attached to your routine and the way things are. What else?
We didn't want to upset the apple cart.
Let's not upset the apple cart. You want to eat those apples at the table, in the tent, preferably. If something ain't broke, don't fix it. Right? I'm afraid to risk. Afraid of the threats of what awaited them in Jerusalem. Afraid for their lives, literally, probably. But we all face our own aversions and attachments when we come up on those thresholds. John Shea talks about, spiritual writer, talks about having been with a lot of people in their spiritual journeys and how they've talked about their God experiences. These amazing mountaintop, shining moment experiences. And he said he's heard lots of them, and he's always interested and asks them all, so what happened afterwards? What did you do with that sliding door moment? And they would usually respond something like, well, I just kept looking for other moments that would be like it, or it's burned in my memory, or I wrote it down and I carry it with me so that it's with me always. And John Shea's comment was, all of those are well and good, but they sort of smack of building a tent. Did they really change you in any way, shape, or form? Did they encourage you to listen and to follow, to walk through that doorway into a new experience of God and life? Because that mountaintop experience wasn't about staying up there and building a tent. It was about going back down. It was about walking the difficult road. It goes back to Jan Richardson's poem. She says, we got this great blessing, and we just want to stay here in the blessing where it feels good. And we'll build walls and a roof, and we'll protect our blessing. And then we can lay out a table, and we'll invite other people into the blessing, and we'll have great meals, and we'll hang out, and we'll talk in this blessing. She says, but that's not what the blessing was meant for. The blessing was meant for traveling. It was meant for you to take it with you, wherever you go. And especially down those tough roads where people really need you. They need your voice. They need your blessing. They need freedom. And so they need you. So the personal questions today are, is there a threshold that you've just set up a tent next to? And you've gotten comfortable there? Is there a voice calling you to listen? And you've got earplugs in or your headphones on? Do you know what the snakes and the dragons are? What your fears are and what you're clinging to, that you don't want to lose, or you're afraid you'll lose, or you don't want to let go of. And maybe it's not a threshold you have to cross right now, but maybe it's something we just need to pay attention to, because those thresholds come up often. And we can choose to go left or go right, to stay home or to have an experience, to speak a word of compassion or to stand up for justice or not, to risk or not. And I don't have the answers to those questions for you, but inside you do. And God is everywhere, speaking to us, helping us to know which direction to go. Amen.